Welcome back to my channel, everyone, for another Pretty Little Liars video. Now, everyone talks about Alison Dilaurentis and how she was one of the most iconic characters in the show, particularly as a villain, how she was the scariest. But Jessica Dilaurentis is the villain that no one saw coming. So today I want to discuss why I personally thought that she would have made a great one that would have taken everyone by surprise. Not only would it have worked, but at points watching the show before her untimely death in season 4, I genuinely believed that she was A. So this is going to be a theory video breaking down all of the clues and very specific things that led me at points to believe that she was A, and why I'm kind of bummed they didn't do this. Now, I could have done a detective theory video on any character, and sure, I could have done something a bit more cliche or obvious like Alison or Aria, and that would have been great. But then I was like, no, I want to discuss a villain that no one talks about, a character who kind of went under everyone's noses, but who was really the root of it all. Why does no one talk about this character? She is literally so creepy. If I had to rewrite the show, I would have seriously considered this. It doesn't help that she was a depressingly underutilized character who deserved way more screen time. And I think it would have been one of the few times where if it was an A reveal, it would have been shocking and creepy, but without being lame or kind of pathetic, because the actress who plays her is very good at playing that villainous, ominous role. If you are interested in seeing more from me, I have launched my Patreon recently with already 50 members, so you can go and join for as little as $2 a month to see extra content from me. And I have been doing a Pretty Little Liars series over there covering other A suspects, and I've thoroughly enjoyed doing that. I also talked about Jessica Dilaurentis on there too, so if you want to check it out, the link will be in the description. Here is my ultimate theory. I believed that Jessica could have, very potentially, actually would have made a lot of sense, faked her death in season 4, and then when the character Mary Drake, her twin sister, comes in later in the show, it was actually Jessica in disguise, like she'd killed her twin sister Mary and taken her place, and now she's calling herself Mary, but it's actually Jessica being A or AD. And I genuinely thought that when Mary Drake arrived at first, because I was like, who is this strange woman? It would explain why her presence on the show always felt so unnecessary and awkward and forced, and I was like, who is she? Because she was never supposed to be there. She was never supposed to be a character. In fact, maybe she didn't exist at all, which is why Alison and Jason are so creeped out by this random woman turning up pretending to be their mum's sister. And this brings me to the twin problem in Pretty Little Liars overall. They messed up so bad. They have too many twins in this show. They were alluding to twins for a long time, and then they do this big plot twist, bringing in Jessica's twin sister Mary. That's enough. They did it. It was a bit weird, but that was the decision they made. And it made it even more ridiculous when we're meant to believe in the season 7 finale that there's another set of twins, this time Spencer and this twin sister who is AD and secretly hates her, even though Spencer literally never knew she existed. And it was way too convoluted. Not only was it convoluted, it was lazy, because they had literally already done it before, just so recently, with the introduction of Mary Drake. So to do the same cheap reveal not only once, but twice, and they think we won't notice, is like insanely lazy. Now in this case, the twin thing with Mary and Jessica could have worked really well, but there was no need to repeat it with Spencer and her twin sister in the finale, because it literally ruined the whole thing. Like, what was that? When Jessica died and Mary came in, I was very suspicious, because Mary was very unsettling as a character, and it was kind of hard for the liars to know whether they could trust her or not. This show talks a lot about kind of generational trauma and people copying their parents, and so it would have been really cool if Jessica had basically killed her sister Mary and then come back pretending to be her with this dark wig, right? Because the only main difference between them is that Jessica has light hair and Mary has dark hair and dark eyebrows. And the crazy thing is that Alison Dilaurentis, the daughter of Jessica, has blonde hair, right? And she has this alter ego called Vivian Darkbloom because she says, aren't you just sick and tired sometimes of being you? And she would use Vivian Darkbloom to do all these things and no one would know it was her. So it would be really cool if it was like she was copying her mum, following in her mum's footsteps. Her sister Charlotte even used the Vivian alter ego to escape in the Escape to New York episode, so that again, as CeCe is also Jessica's child, could highlight that idea of these girls copying their mum's behavior. And as I will explain later, Jessica is actually the cause of most of the things in the show. If Jessica had been upfront and honest from the beginning, a lot of the events in the show that happened would actually never have unfolded if it wasn't for her. Several times in season 7A, Mary is caught by Alison and Jason doing weird things that their mum Jessica would have done. Cooking the same meal that their mum made, singing the same lullaby, or even trying to take back Jessica's stuff. It was really odd.
Beef Wellington. My specialty.
Your specialty? Mm-hmm. That was my mom's specialty. She made it for our birthdays every year.
I suppose it's a family recipe.
And do you suppose you stole my mother's necklace as well?
Jason. I gave it to her.
And I'm actually really bummed that the show missed this huge opportunity that was right in their face that would have been amazing, and they didn't take it because that would have worked so much better. It also would have made so much more sense because Jessica was a character we knew and cared about. So if it was her the whole time in disguise, that would have been way more satisfying than bringing in some random character, Mary, who has no relevance. Anyway, once Mary comes into the picture, she shares a lot of things about Jessica that they didn't know, including the fact that Jessica basically treated her really badly, was a terrible sister, and actually framed her for something when they were younger. Mary Drake is also the one who picked Hannah off the road after Hannah had been kidnapped and tortured by AD. Hannah runs onto the road and sees Mary Drake's car and gets in. It's all very suspicious that Mary Drake happened to be on the road that Hannah escaped onto. The weirder thing is how calm and collected she is when she sees this shivering, dirty, bruised Hannah getting into the car. Like, I don't know how she wasn't losing herself completely, just being like, oh my God, this is so scary. But she was still very calm and kind of soothing. And they were talking in the car and she was saying that all families have secrets. And sometimes those secrets are actual real people. In the Did You Miss Me episode, Alison tripped and fell down a flight of stairs, got a concussion and ended up in the hospital. And she has this very vivid hallucination that her mum is visiting her and talking to her, that her mum is actually alive. And later she thinks she's just going crazy. But I always wondered if it was legitimately Jessica because it didn't seem like a hazy hallucination at all. It seemed very real. And as we know, this was a pattern in the show where the lies are unconscious or drugged and Alison visits them in hospital. But it was as if Alison was very much alive and the girls doubted their own judgment. But as it turned out, Alison was actually alive for real and trying to look out for the girls. So because of that information, I was always like, oh my gosh, are they trying to tell us that Jessica is alive? Now, as we know, okay, I'm speaking hypothetically here. As we know, that didn't happen. And it was kind of depressing because it didn't unfold that way. And I was like, oh man, that's so sad. But like, imagine if it had. Imagine if for real, it was Jessica. So let's get into more of the specific clues because you guys, I know, will love this. I know how much you enjoy this stuff when it's like really detailed. So there were always a few scenes that alluded to Jessica maybe having a drinking problem, or at the very least, like not having great self-control sometimes. She was also the parent that taught Alison really how to become a manipulator and how to become as like nasty as she was. She very much led by example. Of course, she can't be blamed for every single bad thing that her kids did and Jason being a creep, but to a certain degree she is. And the way that she treated Charlotte was absolutely terrible. Like, you don't treat, I don't care who it is, friends, kids, nieces, you don't treat them that way. Mona says in one of the episodes that's when the monster was born, implying that anything bad Alison did, she learned it from somewhere. Maybe from her mum. Especially around season 6 and 7 when we had AD, they were texting in a very different way to the previous A's, trying to be all modern with technology. But some of the texts, no one messages like that. They were very odd with all these very expressive, and a lot of these emojis were just really weird and out of place, and it came across as an older person trying to seem cool and edgy and like the young people, but they actually have no idea how to text normally. So it just made me think of Jessica, especially with A's obsession with vintage items and old rocking horses and those really creepy porcelain dolls. It's just not normally the kind of thing that a young person is into. And as we know, Jessica is older, more old-fashioned. She likes gardening and she likes collecting vintage pieces, so it would have made a lot of sense. We also had that very long-running question, which was never answered, about who locked the mums in the basement. And I strongly believe it could have been Jessica Dilaurentis, because it's her basement. It would make sense she could lock the mums down there. And also, she never seemed to like the other mums, especially Ashley. Sometimes she would get really snappy with her and acting like the queen bee herself for no reason, even though they're both grown adults. And Ashley was always like super nice to her. I don't know why. Like, Ashley never like really snapped back at her, and I was like, how, Ashley? Like, how? She's being so rude to you. And it was really odd how she recreated the dynamics with the liars that her own daughter had with them, as if she thought that she was the same as Alison. It was really bizarre. Like, Alison favored Emily, so Jessica Dilaurentis herself favored Emily and was really sweet and nice to her. Like, it was so odd. But then she would be so snappy and mean with Hannah, because that's how Alison used to be with Hannah, and then a bit more petty. But then with Spencer, it was another level. It was like aggressive and like not trusting her and saying to Alison, Spencer's jealous of you, and thinking the worst of her, which is really funny because out of all the liars, it was Spencer that Alison fought with the most and had the most conflicts with. She also made some really nasty comments to Hannah regarding body image, or wow, Hannah, Alison would be so proud you've lost so much weight, or don't worry, Hannah, the parrot doesn't know how to say hefty Hannah, like just bringing up Hannah's past or whatever.
Don't worry, sweetie. I don't think she taught her hefty Hannah.
And I was like, are you a grown woman? Why? That is so immature. When you look at the fact that A always seemed to have this endless supply of money to build these underground kidnap warehouses, Jessica is the only character where I could really justify her having that amount of money, because she's a rich upper class lady who maybe felt a lot of pressure to appear, you know, like have this facade and seem respectable and, you know, appear a certain way in society and at these events, but underneath there's all this stuff going on. And she is literally the root of everything, no matter what way you look at it. If Jessica had been upfront about CeCe's existence and stuff from the beginning, then we wouldn't have had the dollhouse, we wouldn't have had CeCe becoming A. There was this chain of events that unfolded, and it started from Jessica and CeCe's childhood, and Mona probably would have become A, but it probably would have stopped after that point. In season 4, Ezra was convinced that Mrs. Dilaurentis was A, and I don't know why this plotline was dropped so fast and forgotten about, because it was legitimately a great theory. Also, there's probably some truth to what he's saying, because he's spent months researching this, so it's very concerning that out of all the people he could have thought was A, he thought it was Jessica Dilaurentis. Like, oh my gosh, there had to be a reason for that. Like, this man was stalking all of Rosewood and taking notes and watching everyone for months, and out of everyone he could have been suspicious of, he didn't trust Jessica. Like, that is so worrying, and it really annoys me the show didn't run with that more. We know that she can gaslight people and be emotionally manipulative. For example, when Alison was a child, she's almost trying to put Alison into this weird hypnotic state by trying to get Alison to believe that she saw something that she didn't see, and being like, no, it was just one yellow dress, not 2 yellow dresses. One episode, she was super mad at Alison, and she stormed into the room and like slammed the piano down, and she could have slammed it down on Alison's hands if Alison hadn't like moved her hands off the keyboard. I get she was mad, but like, that was so aggressive. Like, what the heck? Anyway, I still remember in season 4 how creepy it was when there was someone living underneath Jessica's house and watching the Dilaurentis house through these tiny little like holes in the floor. It was super creepy. I only saw that episode like once or twice, and I still remember it because it was just so unsettling. And the fact also that Jessica was so unbothered by it. She was like, oh, it looks like someone was living down here. Weird. Well, whoever it was, they're gone now. There's something insane as well, where Jessica Dilaurentis appears behind Spencer. Veronica doesn't see her and Spencer doesn't see her either. So it can't be a hallucination. It means she was actually there behind her, being really creepy. Why? Like, what was she doing? We even see her shadow leaving behind Veronica and Spencer. So it's like the show's trying to tell us, oh my gosh, she's really there. So are we meant to believe that was Mary Drake? Are we meant to believe that was her? Who knows? But it was pretty damning, especially because there are a few scenes where she behaves in a creepy way, or at one point she's trying to scare Ashley and kind of appears behind her and makes her jump. Or when Emily comes into the Dilaurentis house, Mrs. D is just sat there on the sofa and gives her a shock because Emily didn't see her there. Spencer in one of the episodes finds dirt in her bed, and literally the day before, Mrs. Dilaurentis had said to her, "Isn't it nice to have a sleep on fresh, clean sheets?" And Spencer even noticed it and said it seemed very cryptic because of finding the A threat like in her bed with all the dirt right afterwards. Like, what are the odds? Of course, as we know, with the show we got, Jessica was just a red herring, but that's not the point. Imagine how much better it would have been if she was made into a more prominent character, featured more often, and then it turned out that she would be A. Would it be scary? Sure, but when you think about it, it will be really good, because what's more scary than a parent being the bad guy? Someone that you should trust, who should support you. In the Christmas episode, we see someone attack Hannah, but we don't know who it is. Then the camera turns and we see a pair of eyes sitting and watching. Blue eyes. Who has blue eyes? Jessica Dilaurentis. In Lucas's comment, there was a woman called Arcturus who comes to help a little boy, and they were thinking that Arcturus is AD, and it would make so much sense if that Arcturus figure was meant to represent Mrs. Dilaurentis, who goes around finding people like Lucas or Ren to convert onto the A-team. There's also this very common idea of masks in the show, which would make sense if it's tied to Jessica because of the mask that she keeps up, the pretense in society. Jessica was also dressed as the Black Widow in a Christmas episode, and Marlene King, the author, had literally tweeted, "The lady in black is Endgame." The other Black Widow, Sarah Harvey, is dead, so that literally only leaves Jessica as the other option. Now, this is potentially my favorite clue. I was so excited when I figured this out. When the girls are kidnapped, Spencer finds this old home video of Jessica and her kids on the Campbell farm, and they went there picking apples when they were kids, as did Spencer's family. Apples are so significant, not just for the Hastings family, but also for the Dilaurentis family, showing again their tie because they both went to the same farm. But then I was like, apples, what a weird thing. It keeps popping up in the show as this motif or symbol. Apples are so significant because they symbolize so many things. First of all, familial trees and family trees. As we know, the idea of Jessica having an affair with Peter, Spencer's dad, but also Adam and Eve, the idea of like that biblical idea of sin, and Jessica being the one to sin, and the idea of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, which is a saying. And then obviously Alison ends up being very similar to her mum, or the concept of being rotten to the core, which some people would argue Jessica is. Others would say she was actually a really sweet mum doing her best. But I mean, if she was A, you could really go to town with this metaphor. What about the story of Snow White and how she got poisoned by an apple given to her by her evil stepmom? And it's not that different to how Jessica buried her own daughter Alison alive, thinking she was dead, right? But also, the evil stepmom was jealous, right, of Snow White. So what if Jessica was jealous of her daughter Alison? I mean, there's so many ways you could go with this. And also, the idea that we were given in season 5, Alison felt bad for her mum, and she was like, yeah, my mum thought I was dead and she buried me, and I was trying to talk, but I couldn't. But come on. Did she not feel a pulse? How could Jessica really be convinced that her daughter was dead? What if she'd done it on purpose, you know? Alison says to Spencer in season 2, episode 3, your family has the worst apples, after taking a bite of one. Apples symbolize deceit because Talia was making an apple pie before she told Emily that she was married. The PLL Sherlock on Instagram combined even more clues about this once I actually looked it up, even pointing to Jason and how he was buying apples. And Marlene King had posted a Snapchat picture of an apple and tweeted, an apple a day does not keep A away. In season 4, episode 15, we see A working with an apple next to them. Mona gets an A threat that says you didn't bite the first time, but you will, with an apple attached to it. Alison's missing newspaper was in the trash can next to an apple. Marion used to play a song called Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree. So imagine if Jessica was A, it could have so much significance tied to it. And if Jessica was A from the beginning, then it would have been even more creepy because the girls are getting these messages signed off by A, and at first they're thinking, is it Alison, right? And it will be really creepy, the idea of Jessica threatening these girls, signing off as A, almost pretending to be her own dead daughter, like she wants to be her daughter. And a lot of people were getting quite annoyed with the show because of the amount of suspects and how it feels like at one point every character is A or is revealed to be A, and it gets a bit ridiculous. And I thought so too, but then I realized that maybe it was intentional, because I was doing some research on like film noir. Also for my class at university, we were talking about film noir, and I realized how many similarities there are to the film noir genre and then Pretty Little Liars, almost as if they've taken inspiration from it. Because in film noir, everyone is a suspect. And as we know, the show Pretty Little Liars talks about film noir a lot, and we see Aria watching black and white movies. There's even an entire film noir episode special. So maybe it was actually a really masterful choice by the writers to bring back those old-fashioned vibes and make everyone a suspect. They were watching a movie and Aria said to them, "This is film noir, you're not supposed to trust everyone." Film noirs often have flashbacks, which Pretty Little Liars do. Convoluted storylines and crime, particularly murder, is a prevalent theme. Jealousy is frequently the criminal motivation. Interesting. And as we know, this show pays a lot of homage to film noir and literature references. And then I started looking more into Jessica, and I started rewatching her scenes, and it was like I fell into this rabbit hole. And then I looked up the meaning of the name Jessica. It can mean to see or one who can foresee, which freaked me out because basically every A message ever, including the first one, says "I'm watching you" or "I have eyes everywhere." Jessica's motive wouldn't have been that unbelievable or that far-fetched. We know she's a bit messed up and has some nice qualities too, but also a lot of flaws, and that she was really maybe resentful towards Peter Hastings for not choosing her or not choosing Jason. The idea of her taking out her anger on Spencer in a way that Spencer could never understand, and then being like super controlling of Charlotte and not just allowing her to be. She basically stole Charlotte from Mary and wouldn't let Mary see her child, and then isolates Charlotte, has her locked up effectively, and then Charlotte is almost brainwashed saying Mum's the only one who's ever really loved me or cared about me. Like, that's very manipulative and unhealthy. Charlotte herself said to Bethany that her mum Jessica had told her that you're always better off with a really good lie, and anything can become believable with a really good lie. It's like they have this weird Stockholm syndrome relationship, because Charlotte's in Radley, and even though it was kind of more of the dad's decision to put her in Radley, the mum's involved in that too, right? But her mum's the only one visiting her, so you get very attached to the only one person that seems to care about you or show up for you like at all. And that could hint to Mrs. Dilaurentis having a controlling nature, wanting to isolate her victims and treating people like dolls. In the same way in season 2 episode 6, when Mrs. Dilaurentis reunites with the girls after Alison's death, and she wants them to wear Alison's clothes, and the girls are really uncomfortable. They're like, we don't want to model them for this obituary or whatever. It's weird, like it's creepy. We don't want to be strutting around in her stuff. But it seems as if Mrs. Dilaurentis is wanting to dress them up like her own dolls. In season 4 episode 1, Hannah says it seems like Mrs. Dilaurentis is building a shrine to Alison because all her old stuff is there, and Mrs. Dilaurentis is struggling to move on. And if she was A, that would have a far more sinister undertone. In season 4 episode 2, we see a flashback of Alison and her mum Jessica at lunch. Alison wants to have this crazy sleepover and her mum's saying no. Then she gets really annoyed at her mum, so she holds her breath to try and embarrass her until her mum gives in. I was shocked by the scene because temper tantrums are like not attractive. You think she would have grown out of this habit by now, but it's interesting how much control she has over Jessica and how easily Jessica gives in rather than just letting her pass out. One of the biggest jump scares and shocks in the series is in like season 4 episode 1, where Spencer goes to the window and sees Mrs. Dilaurentis standing there staring right at her. It's absolutely terrifying, and I jump every time I see that scene. It is the creepiest thing. Like, what's she trying to do? Threaten her? Scare her? Like, what is that? What is your issue with Spencer? It was so inappropriate the way that she spoke to Spencer. Spencer's a teenager and she's treating her like trash, and is so weirdly like rude to her. And then directly after, Spencer receives a threatening A note. In season 4 episode 2, Jessica has Tippy the bird, and she talks to Hannah about it and says, careful what you say to the bird, it could come back to haunt you. And the bird has a very unsettling habit of mimicry because Alison used to own it. And Jessica then says, do you know if anyone wants a bird? I have enough voices in my head. weird. In season 4, episode 1, that's when Alison and Mrs. Dilaurentis in this flashback have a big argument over this unhealthy, as Jessica calls it, toxic relationship between CeCe and Alison, and how they're basically playing all these stupid games together. And she was furious that she saw CeCe like dressed up in Alison's clothes pretending to be her, and she found it very like obsessive and weird. And she's saying basically, you two can't see each other anymore, that girl's no longer welcome in this house, and it's really unhealthy for her to be like behaving like this, because A, it's her fault, and B, CeCe is her child, but she's behaving like CeCe isn't. It just comes across as extremely hypocritical. And she says to Hannah later, something about their relationship was wrong, obsessive. Hannah says what, like wearing each other's makeup, clothes? Then Jessica says more like wearing each other's personalities, which becomes far more creepy when you later learn that actually Alison and CeCe are related. And there's just so many things later we find out about Mrs. D and all these secrets she had, and it made me wonder, what other secrets does she have, because she keeps lying. In season 4, episode 23, Mrs. Dilaurentis in this flashback assumed that Spencer was the one stalking and bullying Ali because Spencer's always been jealous of you and she has a reason to hurt this family. Now, you could argue that she just didn't like Spencer, but what if Mrs. Dilaurentis was A, and so she's looking for a scapegoat, she's looking to project for someone to blame? And that's the thing, when Alison told her mum, I'm being bullied, I'm being sent these creepy texts, which she was being harassed by Mona, genuinely scared for her life, her mum has no compassion. Her mum's like, oh, I thought I raised you better, like fight fire with fire, like just stand up to them, it's not a big deal. And Jason even makes this comment like, oh, okay, wow, because it's spoken like a bully herself, someone who has no compassion. I hope you found this video interesting. Let me know what you would have thought if she was A. I'm not saying it would be the best reveal. I don't think it would have been my top choice. I probably would have preferred someone like Aria or Alison, but if those options were not available, Mrs. Dilaurentis could have been an excellent villain, and this is why. So if you want to binge watch the rest of my Pretty Little Liars playlist, the link will be in the description, and also follow me on Instagram if you want to see more updates from life in Paris, and I will see you guys for the next video. Bye guys!